The first cop car pulled up to my truck, just as I was finishing Mrs. Henderson's driveway on Maple Street. And I knew immediately something was wrong because Officer Rick Martinez was supposed to be off duty today. He climbed out of his patrol car with that apologetic look I had seen before, the one that said he was about to deliver news neither of us would enjoy. I killed the engine on my plow truck and hopped down into the fresh snow, my boots crunching against the white powder that had dumped nearly 18 inches on Riverside Heights, Connecticut overnight. "Danny," Rick said, and the way he said my name confirmed my suspicion. "We got a complaint." "Let me guess," I replied, already knowing the answer. "Deborah Kendrick from the HOA," Rick nodded slowly, pulling out his notepad even though I could tell his heart was not in it. "She called dispatch 20 minutes ago. Said you are operating a commercial business in a residential zone without proper permits. Said you are violating HOA regulations and disturbing the peace at 6 in the morning." I looked at my watch. It was actually 7:30, but I was not about to argue the small details. The sun was fully up now, weak winter light filtering through the gray clouds that promised more snow later. Around us, the neighborhood was coming to life. People were digging out their cars, kids were building snowmen in front yards, and here I was, getting hassled for doing the exact thing that made all of that possible. "Rick, you know this is bullshit," I said, keeping my voice level. "I have been plowing driveways in Riverside Heights for 3 years. I have all my business licenses, my insurance, everything. The HOA does not get to decide whether I can operate a snow removal service." "I know, man," Rick said, and he genuinely looked pained. "You have cleared my driveway every major storm for 2 years. Best service in town, but I still have to respond to the complaint. Deborah is threatening to file an official report with the city if I do not come out here and document everything." I took a deep breath, watching the vapor cloud form in the freezing air. This was exactly the kind of petty nonsense I had been dealing with ever since Deborah Kendrick took over as president of the Riverside Heights Homeowners Association 6 months ago. Before that, the HOA had been run by an older gentleman named Frank who basically let people live their lives as long as they kept their lawns mowed and did not paint their houses neon colors. Deborah was a different story entirely. "What do you need from me?" I asked. Rick flipped through his notepad. "Just show me your business license, insurance certificate, and any contracts you have with residents here. I will document it all, send it to Deborah, and hopefully that will be the end of it." I walked back to my truck and pulled out my folder from the glove compartment. Inside were laminated copies of everything I needed. My Connecticut business registration for Dan's snow removal services, my general liability insurance policy with $2 million in coverage, my commercial vehicle registration, and a stack of signed contracts from 23 different residents in Riverside Heights. I handed the folder to Rick. "All there," I said. "Every signature, every payment agreement, all above board." Rick photographed each document with his phone, taking his time to make sure he captured everything clearly. While he worked, I saw curtains twitching in nearby windows. Great. Now the whole neighborhood was going to be talking about how the cops were called on me. This was exactly what Deborah wanted, to make me look like some kind of criminal operation when all I was doing was helping people get to work on time during a snowstorm. "Danny, I am putting in my report that you have provided all necessary documentation and are operating a legitimate business," Rick said, handing the folder back. "But between you and me, Deborah is not going to let this go. She has been on a tear lately about commercial activity in the neighborhood." "What commercial activity?" I asked. "I plow driveways. I am not running a car dealership out here." Last month she went after Sarah Chen for running her graphic design business from home, Rick said. Tried to fine her $500 for having clients visit her house for meetings. Sarah had to get a lawyer involved. Before that, it was the Murphy kid who mows lawns in summer. She tried to shut him down too. I had heard about both situations through the neighborhood grapevine, but I had foolishly thought that my business would be different because I was not technically based in Riverside Heights. I lived in the next town over in Millbrook. I just had a lot of clients in this neighborhood because the houses were spread out with long driveways, and people were willing to pay good money to not spend 2 hours shoveling before work. "Thanks for being cool about this, Rick," I said. "Hey, you are still coming by my place this afternoon, right?" Rick asked. "Angela will kill me if I have to miss another family dinner because I am stuck in the driveway." "Already on the schedule," I assured him. 2 o'clock, just like always." Rick gave me a quick handshake and headed back to his patrol car. I watched him drive away, then climbed back into my truck. I still had 6 more driveways to clear before noon, and I was not about to let Deborah Kendrick intimidate me into abandoning my clients. These people depended on me. Mrs. Henderson, whose driveway I had just finished, was 78 years old. There was no way she could shovel all this snow herself. The Patels 3 houses down both worked at the hospital and had rotating shifts. They needed reliable snow removal to get to their jobs. This was not just about money for me, though I would be lying if I said the income did not matter. I had built this business from nothing, investing in a good truck, a quality plow, and building a reputation for dependable service. My phone rang as I was pulling out of Mrs. Henderson's driveway. The caller ID showed Marcus Wright, one of my regular clients who lived on Oak Lane, deeper into Riverside Heights. "Danny, man, I hate to do this," Marcus said when I answered, "but I just got a letter from the HOA. It was literally stuffed in my mailbox this morning. Says that any resident who hires commercial snow removal services is subject to a fine of $200 per occurrence." I felt my jaw tighten. "When did you get this letter?" like I said this morning. "It is dated yesterday, but I definitely did not have it in my mailbox last night when I got home from work." "Marcus, that is not even legal," I said. "The HOA cannot fine you for hiring a legitimate business to provide a service. That is not in their jurisdiction." I know," Marcus said, and I could hear the stress in his voice. "But Danny, I cannot afford to get into a legal battle with these people. My wife and I are already stretched thin with the mortgage and the kids' daycare. If they start hitting us with fines, even if we fight them and win eventually, we still have to come up with the money up front." "So you are canceling?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "I am sorry, man. I really am. Your service has been great, but I cannot risk it." I told him I understood, though inside I was seething. This was Deborah's strategy. She could not legally stop me from operating my business, so instead she was going after my clients, using intimidation and the threat of fines to scare them away. It was calculated, manipulative, and probably illegal as hell, but it was working. By the time I finished my next 3 driveways, I had received 4 more cancellation calls. People apologized, explained their situations, but the result was the same. In the span of 2 hours, Deborah Kendrick had destroyed a quarter of my client base in Riverside Heights. I was fuming as I drove toward the Peterson house on Birch Street. Jim and Laura Peterson were both lawyers, and I figured if anyone would have the backbone to stand up to this HOA nonsense, it would be them. Jim was already outside when I pulled up, waving me down. "Danny, hold up," he called, walking through the snow in his driveway toward my truck. My heart sank, not them too, but Jim surprised me. "Listen, I got the same letter everyone else got this morning. Laura and I both read it, and I want you to know that we are not canceling. What Deborah is doing is illegal on about 6 different levels. The HOA cannot impose fines for hiring outside contractors for standard property maintenance. Snow removal falls under that category. I felt a wave of relief. Thanks, Jim. I really appreciate it. Do not thank me yet, Jim said. I want to help you fight this. Laura and I have been talking about getting the HOA board removed anyway. Deborah has been out of control since day one. This snow removal thing is just the latest in a long line of overreach. Are you willing to push back on this, or are you going to fold? I am not folding, I said firmly. This is my business. I have done everything right, followed every rule. I am not going to let some power-hungry HOA president with too much time on her hands shut me down. Good, Jim said. Then here is what we are going to do. First, you are going to keep operating. Do not cancel any services. Do not back down. Second, I am going to draft a cease and desist letter to the HOA on behalf of you and every resident who wants to use your services. Third, if Deborah does not back off, we are going to file a lawsuit against the HOA for tortious interference with business relationships. That sounds expensive, I said. It can be, Jim admitted, but I will do it pro bono for you. Consider it my way of thanking you for 3 years of reliable service, and also my way of finally having a legitimate reason to take Deborah down a peg. We shook hands, and I got to work on his driveway. As I plowed, pushing the heavy snow into neat banks along the edges of his property, I felt my confidence returning. I was not alone in this fight. Jim and Laura were respected members of the community, and if they were willing to stand up to the HOA, maybe others would follow. After finishing the Peterson driveway, I headed to Rick Martinez's house right on schedule. His place was in a different neighborhood, outside of Riverside Heights, which meant no HOA drama. Rick and his wife Angela had bought a nice colonial-style home with a circular driveway that took me about 45 minutes to clear properly. Angela came out with a thermos of coffee while I was working. Rick told me what happened this morning, she said, handing me the thermos. That HOA president sounds like a real piece of work. You have no idea, I said, taking a grateful sip of the hot coffee. She is costing me clients left and right. Well, you have got a customer for life here, Angela said. Rick has been telling everyone at the station how great your service is. Actually, I think half the police department uses you for their snow removal now. That was true. Over the past 2 years, I had built up a solid client base among the Riverside and Millbrook police departments. It started with Rick, who I had met at a community event, and spread through word of mouth. Cops worked irregular hours and needed reliable snow removal even more than most people. I had made it a point to offer them a small discount as a thank you for their service, and it had paid off in loyalty and referrals. Speaking of which, Angela continued, Rick wanted me to tell you that if you need anything, any documentation or official statements about your business for this HOA thing, he is happy to provide it. He said you are one of the most professional contractors he has ever worked with. Tell him I appreciate it, I said. I might actually take him up on that. I finished Rick's driveway and moved on to my other clients outside of Riverside Heights. The rest of the day went smoothly. No cop cars, no threatening letters, just good honest work. But I could not stop thinking about Deborah Kendrick and her crusade against my business. What was her end game here? Why did she care so much about whether people hired me to plow their driveways? That evening, after I had finished all my jobs and put my truck in the garage, I did some research. I pulled up the Riverside Heights HOA website and started reading through their bylaws and regulations. It took me 2 hours to wade through all the legal jargon, But finally, I found what I was looking for. There was indeed a clause about commercial activity within the neighborhood, but it specifically referred to businesses operating out of residential properties. It said nothing about residents hiring outside contractors for services. I also found something interesting in the meeting minutes from 6 months ago, right around when Deborah became president. There was a proposal on the table to contract with a company called Premier Property Services for exclusive snow removal in Riverside Heights. The motion had been tabled pending further discussion, but there was no record of it being voted on or rejected. Curious, I looked up Premier Property Services. Their website was slick and professional, offering everything from landscaping to snow removal to pressure washing. Their prices were about 30% higher than mine, and there, on their About Us page, was a photo of their management team. Third from the left was Brandon Kendrick, listed as Director of Operations. Brandon Kendrick, same last name as Deborah. I did some more digging and found a local news article from 2 years ago about a charity fundraiser. There was a photo of Deborah and Brandon together, with a caption identifying Brandon as Deborah's son. Everything suddenly made sense. Deborah was not just on a power trip. She was trying to eliminate competition for her son's company so she could push through that exclusive contract with the HOA. It was corruption, plain and simple. I immediately called Jim Peterson and explained what I had found. "That is exactly what I needed," Jim said, and I could hear the excitement in his voice. Conflict of interest, potential embezzlement if any HOA funds are being used improperly, abuse of authority. Danny, this changes everything. With this information, we are not just fighting over your business. We are talking about potential criminal charges against Deborah. "So what do we do?" I asked. "Let me make some calls," Jim said. "I am going to reach out to some of the other board members, the ones who are not in Deborah's pocket. This is bigger than we thought." The next morning brought another foot of snow, which meant another full day of work for me. I started early, hitting my clients outside Riverside Heights first. I was deliberately avoiding the neighborhood until I heard back from Jim about how to proceed. Around 10 in the morning, my phone rang. It was Mrs. Henderson. "Danny, dear, I am so sorry to bother you," she said, her elderly voice wavering slightly. "But I just received a notice from the HOA. They are saying that I owe a $400 fine for using your services during the last 2 storms. They are threatening to put a lien on my house if I do not pay within 30 days. I felt my blood pressure spike. Going after Marcus Wright and the others was one thing, but targeting a 78-year-old widow was crossing a serious line. "Mrs. Henderson, do not worry about it," I said, keeping my voice calm and reassuring. "That fine is not legal. The HOA cannot do what they are doing. I have a lawyer working on this right now, and we are going to get it sorted out. Do not pay them anything, okay?" "But a lien on my house," she said, and I could hear tears in her voice. "Danny, I have lived here for 40 years. I cannot lose my home." "You are not going to lose your home," I promised her. "I will come by this afternoon after I am done with my other jobs. We will figure this out together." I hung up and immediately called Jim Peterson. When I told him about Mrs. Henderson's situation, I heard him curse under his breath. "That is elderly abuse," Jim said flatly. "Deborah just handed us another charge on a silver platter." "Danny, I need you to collect copies of all these fine notices from your clients, every single one, and I need you to document every interaction you have had with the HOA about this." "I can do that," I said. "Good. I am calling an emergency meeting of the HOA board for tomorrow night." I have already spoken to 3 other board members, and they are all furious when they found out about the conflict of interest with Deborah's son. None of them knew about it. Deborah has been operating completely on her own authority, sending out these letters without board approval. So she has been acting alone this whole time, I asked. Looks that way, Jim confirmed. Which means every fine notice she sent out is invalid. The board never voted to impose fines for snow removal services. She just decided on her own to start threatening people. This was getting worse by the minute, or better, depending on how you looked at it. The more Deborah overreached, the easier it would be to remove her from power and potentially hold her accountable for what she had done. I spent the rest of the day collecting information. I visited every one of my clients in Riverside Heights, made copies of their fine notices, and documented their stories. Mrs. Henderson was not the only elderly resident being targeted. The Patels had been threatened with fines despite both of them working essential jobs at the hospital. The Chens, who had a newborn baby, were told that their HOA dues would be tripled if they did not pay the fine. It was a systematic campaign of harassment and intimidation. By late afternoon, I had statements from 14 different residents. I drove to Jim Peterson's office and handed over everything I had collected. "This is perfect," Jim said, flipping through the documents. "Danny, I cannot thank you enough for being so thorough. With this evidence, we have enough to not only remove Deborah from the board but potentially press criminal charges." "What kind of charges?" I asked. "Fraud, extortion, abuse of authority, elder abuse in Mrs. Henderson's case," Jim listed. "And that is just what I can think of off the top of my head. Once we bring in the authorities and they start digging, who knows what else they will find." "You think it is going to come to that?" I asked. "Criminal charges?" "After what I have seen here, absolutely," Jim said. Deborah threatened to put a lien on an elderly woman's home over an unauthorized fine. That is not just HOA overreach. That is criminal conduct. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for 7 o'clock the next evening at the Riverside Heights Community Center. Jim advised me to attend, along with as many affected residents as possible. He wanted to make sure Deborah understood the full scope of opposition against her. I spent the next day doing my regular snow removal work, but my mind was on the evening meeting. Part of me was nervous about confronting Deborah directly, but another part of me was ready for this fight. She had threatened my business, harassed my clients, and targeted vulnerable people. It was time for her to face consequences. The community center meeting room was packed when I arrived at 6:45. I counted at least 40 residents, which was huge for an HOA meeting. Usually, these things drew maybe 10 people at most. Jim had clearly spread the word about what was going down. Deborah Kendrick was already there, sitting at the head table with 4 other board members. She was exactly what you would expect. Mid-50s, blonde hair cut in that specific style that seemed to be required for HOA presidents, wearing a blazer that screamed authority. When she saw me walk in, her expression hardened. "Mr. Anderson," she said, her voice dripping with false politeness, "I am surprised to see you here. This is a meeting for Riverside Heights residents only." "He is here as my guest," Jim Peterson said, standing up from his seat in the audience. "And as a party directly affected by recent HOA actions." "There is no need for guests at this meeting," Deborah said. "We are discussing internal HOA business." "Actually, Deborah, we need to discuss your conduct as president," said one of the other board members, a woman named Patricia who I recognized from a few of my snow removal jobs. "Jim brought some serious concerns to my attention, and I think we need to address them publicly." Deborah's face flushed red. "I do not know what you are talking about." "Then let me clarify," Jim said, walking to the front of the room. He held up a stack of papers. "These are copies of fine notices that you sent to 14 different residents over the past week. You threatened them with fines, increased dues, and even property liens if they did not stop using Dan Anderson's snow removal services. Can you explain your authority to issue these fines? They were in violation of HOA regulations regarding commercial activity, Deborah said, but her voice had lost some of its confidence. Which regulation specifically? Patricia asked. Because I have read our bylaws front to back, and I cannot find anything that prohibits residents from hiring outside contractors for property maintenance. We have discussed the issue of commercial activity multiple times, Deborah said. Discussed, yes, another board member chimed in. This was Robert, an accountant who lived on the north side of the neighborhood. But we never voted on any fines related to snow removal services. You do not have the authority to unilaterally impose fines without board approval. The room was silent. Every eye was on Deborah, watching her squirm. Furthermore, Jim continued, we have discovered that you failed to disclose a significant conflict of interest. Your son Brandon is Director of Operations for Premier Property Services, the same company that you proposed for an exclusive snow removal contract with this HOA 6 months ago. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Several residents looked shocked. My son's business is irrelevant, Deborah said, but she was clearly rattled now. It is completely relevant, Jim countered. You have been systematically trying to eliminate competition for your son's company by harassing his competitor and the residents who use his services. That is not just a conflict of interest. That is corruption. I have done nothing illegal, Deborah snapped. You threatened to place a lien on Mrs. Henderson's property over an unauthorized fine, Jim said. Mrs. Henderson is 78 years old and living on a fixed income. You frightened her into thinking she could lose her home. That is elder abuse, Deborah. That is a crime. Mrs. Henderson stood up from her seat in the audience. You scared me half to death, she said, her voice shaking but firm. I have lived in this neighborhood for 40 years. I have always paid my dues, followed the rules, been a good neighbor. And you threatened to take away my home because I hired a nice young man to plow my driveway. You should be ashamed of yourself. The room erupted in applause. Deborah looked around, seemingly realizing for the first time that she had completely lost the room. I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in President Kendrick, Patricia said. I second that motion, Robert added. The vote was swift and unanimous. All 4 other board members voted to remove Deborah from her position as president, effective immediately. She tried to argue to defend herself, but it was over. Patricia was elected interim president, and her first act was to void all the fine notices that Deborah had sent out. But Jim was not done. After the board vote, he stood up again. There is one more thing, he said. Given the serious nature of Deborah's actions, particularly the threats against elderly residents and the attempted extortion of multiple homeowners, I believe we need to involve law enforcement. What Deborah did goes beyond HOA misconduct. It crosses into criminal territory. Patricia looked uncomfortable but nodded. I think you are right. Will you handle that, Jim? I will, Jim said. Deborah finally found her voice. You cannot do this. I was trying to protect this neighborhood. You were trying to protect your son's business, Jim corrected. At the expense of your neighbors and a legitimate local contractor. You abused your authority, you broke the law, and now you need to face the consequences. The meeting adjourned shortly after. Several residents came up to thank me and apologize for canceling their contracts. I told them it was okay, that I understood they were just trying to protect themselves. Most of them wanted to restart their service immediately, which was a relief both financially and personally. As people filed out, Rick Martinez approached me. I had not even realized he was there. I came as a resident, he said, seeing my surprised expression. but I am going to have to follow up on this as an officer too. Jim already gave me a heads up about what was going on. Danny, I am going to need you to come down to the station tomorrow and give an official statement about everything that happened. Of course, I said. Whatever you need. Deborah is in real trouble, Rick said quietly. The elder abuse angle alone is serious. Add in the extortion, the fraud, the misuse of her HOA authority for personal gain, and she is looking at actual jail time if the district attorney decides to prosecute. I looked over at Deborah, who was gathering her things from the head table. She looked small now, defeated. Part of me felt bad for her, but then I thought about Mrs. Henderson's frightened voice on the phone, about all the stress she had caused to people who were just trying to live their lives and maintain their properties. She made her choices, I said. Yeah, she did, Rick agreed. The next morning, I went to the police station and spent 2 hours giving a detailed statement. Rick took my information, along with copies of all the documents I had collected. He told me that Mrs. Henderson had also come in to file a formal complaint, as had several other residents. The detective assigned to the case is taking this very seriously, Rick said. Financial crimes, especially those targeting elderly victims, are a priority. You should expect to hear from the district attorney's office within the next few weeks. What about my business? I asked. Am I clear to keep operating in Riverside Heights? Absolutely, Rick said. The HOA has no authority to stop you. Patricia sent out a notice to all residents this morning clarifying that there are no restrictions on hiring outside contractors for snow removal or any other property maintenance services. You are good to go. I left the station feeling lighter than I had in weeks. My phone started ringing almost immediately. It was Marcus Wright, the first client who had canceled. Danny, man, I just saw the email from the new HOA president, Marcus said. I am so sorry for canceling on you. Can I get back on your schedule? Of course, I said. I will put you down for the next storm. Thanks, man. And hey, I heard what happened at the meeting last night. My wife and I were not there, but everyone is talking about it. You really stood up for yourself and for the neighborhood. That took guts. I just did not want to let a bully win, I said, over the next few days. All but one of my canceled clients returned. The one who did not was apparently a close friend of Deborah's and had moved to using Premier Property Services out of loyalty. That was fine by me. I did not need every client in Riverside Heights, just enough to make my business sustainable. 3 weeks later, I got a call from Jim Peterson. Danny, I wanted to give you an update, he said. The district attorney filed charges against Deborah Kendrick this morning. She is being charged with 3 counts of attempted extortion, 1 count of elder abuse, and 1 count of fraud. Her arraignment is next week. Wow, I said. I honestly did not think it would go this far. The DA takes this stuff seriously, Jim said. Especially the elder abuse charge, Mrs. Henderson's testimony was powerful. She really made an impact. The DA is also investigating Premier Property Services to see if Brandon Kendrick was involved in any of this. If he knew what his mother was doing and benefited from it, he could face charges too. What is Deborah saying? I asked. She is claiming she was just trying to enforce HOA rules and that everything got blown out of proportion, Jim said. Her lawyer is trying to negotiate a plea deal, but honestly, with the evidence we have, I do not think the DA is going to be very generous. And the HOA? I asked. How are things going there? Much better, Jim said. Patricia has been great as president. She has already rolled back a bunch of Deborah's more ridiculous rules. We are actually functioning like a normal HOA now, just dealing with basic neighborhood maintenance and common area upkeep. It is what it should have been all along. The snow kept falling throughout February and into early March. I stayed busy, adding new clients not just in Riverside Heights but in neighboring communities too. My reputation had spread after the HOA situation, and people seemed to appreciate that I was willing to stand up for my business and my clients. Rick continued to be one of my most loyal customers. One afternoon in late March, as the last of the winter storms finally moved through, I was finishing up his driveway when he came out with Angela and their 2 kids. "Danny, we wanted to thank you for another great season," Rick said. "You have made our lives so much easier." "Just doing my job," I said. "It is more than that," Angela added. "You stood up for yourself and for this whole community. Deborah was out of control, and if you had not pushed back, who knows how bad it would have gotten." Their daughter, who looked about 8 years old, handed me a drawing she had made. It showed a stick figure standing next to a plow truck with snow falling around it. "Thank you for plowing our driveway," she had written at the bottom in careful letters. "That is going on my refrigerator," I told her, and she beamed. In April, Deborah Kendrick pled guilty to 2 counts of attempted extortion and 1 count of elder abuse. The fraud charge was dropped as part of the plea agreement. She was sentenced to 18 months in prison, with credit for time served, and 3 years of probation after her release. She was also ordered to pay restitution to Mrs. Henderson and the other residents she had harassed. Brandon Kendrick was not charged with any crimes, but Premier Property Services lost most of its contracts in the area after the story made the local news. Apparently, people did not want to do business with a company whose director had been at the center of an HOA corruption scandal, even if he was not personally charged. As for me, my business continued to grow. I hired an assistant in the fall to help me prepare for the next winter season. I bought a second plow truck and expanded my service area. By the time the first snow of the next season fell in December, I had over 60 regular clients and a waiting list for new ones. I ran into Mrs. Henderson at the grocery store one Saturday in early December. She was doing well, looking healthier and more relaxed than she had during the whole HOA ordeal. "Danny, dear," she said, giving me a hug. "I wanted you to know that the restitution money came through from Deborah. The judge ordered her to pay $5,000 for the distress she caused me. I am donating it all to the senior center in her name. I figured that was the most appropriate way to handle it." "That is very generous of you," I said. "Well, you taught me something important through all of this," Mrs. Henderson said. "You taught me that it is okay to stand up to bullies, even when it is scary. Especially when it is scary. At my age, I thought I was past all that, but watching you fight for your business and for all of us, it reminded me that we are never too old to stand up for what is right." That conversation stuck with me. This whole experience had started as a simple business dispute, me trying to protect my livelihood from an overreaching HOA. But it had turned into something bigger, a lesson about standing your ground, about not letting people abuse their authority, about the importance of community and supporting each other. The following year brought more snow, more clients, and more success for my business. I hired 2 more employees and bought a 3rd truck. We became the go-to snow removal service for most of northern Connecticut. Rick helped spread the word among other police departments, and soon I had officers from 4 different towns using my services. Patricia remained president of the Riverside Heights HOA and did an excellent job. Under her leadership, the neighborhood actually became a nicer place to live. She focused on legitimate concerns like maintaining common areas, organizing neighborhood events, and facilitating communication between residents. You know, the things an HOA is actually supposed to do. Jim and Laura Peterson became good friends of mine. We got together for barbecues in the summer and holiday dinners in the winter. Jim never charged me a dime for all his legal work during the HOA fight, and I made sure his driveway was always the first one cleared after every storm. Looking back now, almost 2 years after that morning when Rick pulled up to Mrs. Henderson's driveway to respond to Deborah's complaint, I realize how differently things could have turned out. If I had backed down, if I had let Deborah intimidate me into leaving Riverside Heights, I would have lost a huge portion of my business. More than that, I would have set a precedent that the HOA could bully anyone they wanted without consequences. Instead, by standing my ground and fighting back, not just for myself but for all the residents who were being harassed, I helped create real change. Deborah faced consequences for her actions. The HOA became functional again, and my business thrived. The legal system worked the way it was supposed to. Deborah was held accountable for her crimes. The residents got justice, and I got to keep doing what I loved, providing a valuable service to people who needed it. On a cold morning this past January, I was out plowing after a particularly heavy storm. As I worked my way through Riverside Heights, clearing driveway after driveway, I thought about everything that had happened. The threats, the police visit, the confrontation at the HOA meeting, the criminal charges, all of it. My phone rang. It was Rick. "Hey Danny, you almost done with the neighborhood?" he asked. "Got about 3 more houses, then I will head to your place," I said. "Perfect. Angela is making her famous chili. You should stay for lunch after you finish the driveway." "Sounds great," I said. As I hung up and got back to work, I smiled. This was what it was all about. Good work, good clients who became good friends, and a business I had built with my own hands. No HOA, no matter how aggressive, could take that away from me. The sun broke through the clouds as I finished my last driveway in Riverside Heights. The neighborhood looked beautiful, covered in fresh white snow with clear driveways leading to warm homes. I had played a small part in making this community functional and livable, and that felt good. I climbed back into my truck and headed toward Rick's house, ready for Angela's famous chili and an afternoon with friends. My business was solid. My reputation was strong. And I had learned an important lesson about standing up for what is right, even when it is hard. Deborah Kendrick had tried to destroy my business to benefit her son's company. She had used her authority as HOA president to harass and intimidate residents. She had threatened vulnerable people and abused her power in ways that crossed the line from petty tyranny into actual crimes, and she had paid the price for it. Justice was served. The system worked, and I got to keep doing what I loved, one plowed driveway at a time.